Welcome everybody. Welcome to Spinnerack. Today we have with us, we have Cal and we have P Money. Okay? Today we're going to be talking about Darwyn Cooke. Unfortunately, one of the top stars, one of the lights of animation, one of the lights of DC has passed away. And we want to give him his due. We want to talk about his works of art. Okay? And how we think that impacted the animated universe.
And comics.
And comics.
He started in animation and then...
It's comics.
At
the end of the day, it's all comics.
Well, I think his animation, particularly his Batman animation, was pretty revolutionary, particularly if anybody who's watching comics in the last couple of years. The style and format that he used for Batman, set the standard for a lot of them.
I never watched the comic, but I have watched some animation, if that's what you mean.
You know what I mean. Thank you, sir.
No problem.
Okay. But, do you disagree with that?
What I would like to hear is, what was your introduction to Darwyn Cooke?
Batman Beyond.
Okay.
Batman Beyond, Batman the Animated Series. Those were my introductions to Darwyn Cooke. I thought that when I first thought of it, I was like, what type of art is this? But as I got into it, I loved the way I got used to, and I actually started loving the way he drew his characters. Especially being Batman was a template. You can't go wrong there.
It's also in the style of Bruce Timm, but then he just did it so well. And then I think the episodes get better when you have Tim, Darwyn Cooke, Glenn Murakami, Paul Dini writing. You had all that stuff happening. You see him just, it's just like, everything is just going right. You have that, Batman Beyond. And then by himself he directed the Men in Black. I watched Men in Black. I like that cartoon too. So.
But I was only on for like a short time though.
I watched.
That did a couple of seasons.
No, I don't think so. Did it?
Yeah, it was 2 seasons. That's good. That's good for an animated
movie.
That's good for. That's good. You got Voltron averaging 2 seasons, so that's pretty good for a series like Men in Black.
Or Voltron. We'll talk about Voltron later, but Voltron averaged more than 2 seasons. But
not since the original. But anyway,
of course, not since the original. So what's your take on him?
Well, here, Petey. I got a lot to say. No, the passing of Darwyn Cooke, especially like after Prince. We're not doing Prince, of course.
No, we're not doing Prince.
But Darwyn Cooke is, for me, it's a big deal because Darwyn Cooke is coming from a mold that is no longer being made for comics and a type of creative force that is no longer, it's just not there any longer with comics. So as these guys leave, as they pass on to the next life, and hopefully they're doing, whatever they're doing, a lot of the same stuff. That's my hope. I keep looking, and it's not like we're getting more of them. It's just like we're getting fewer and fewer as we go on. So, Pete,
I really got into that last season of Batman Animated. I really liked that when Bruce Timm redesigned it, and then when they did the Legends, I found out that he did the storyboards for the Legends of the Dark Knight, specifically the Dark Knight scene. So it's the first to see someone, and he's had, Darwyn's had his issue with mainly Dark Knight Strikes Again, but it was interesting to see him take that and animate it, like really minimize it, but keeping some of Frank's aspect in the boards. You can see that, and you see them translate that into the animations. Then I'm watching that. I was watching the Men in Black, watching Batman Beyond. After that, he had Batman Ego, which I didn't see when it came out, but there was always this ad for the New Frontier.
The New Frontier.
And it was just like year after year, it's like the New Frontier, the New Frontier. And go back to the old sort of timeline of DC Comics, where there was Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, and then you had a lot of the Golden Age heroes, which, like the old original Flash and Hourman, and have them sort of leave, and then you still have Superman and Batman there. So it's one of those interesting things where he sort of captured the timeline of DC, captured the Julie Schwartz entering the DC universe, and captured that feel of not just the Kirby art, but some of the other artists of the period, like Morton Meskin, sort of capture that feel of those 50s moving into the 60s. Where you get
like Wayne Boring coming like
more like Carmen, from Wayne Boring and going to Carmen Infantino, those types, and Murphy Anderson, those type of artists that were going into the 60s. So that was amazing. And then I didn't really expect them. Most of the time when people get famous, they don't always stay in comics. They have their work, and then they do another Batman and do another such and such. But he was just all over the place after that. You could see him on Jonah Hex. He did Minutemen before Watchmen. He was doing the Twilight Children that was the last thing I think he did for Vertigo.
But why did he do the New Frontier? I mean, why did he do that whole Silver Age, Golden Age, Silver Age?
Well, they asked him to do it because JLA was hot, Morrison was hot, so they were like, oh, this Batman Eagle thing was good. Can you do that for JLA? And then he came up with something which was more of, a elastic timeline of the past. And then they were like, well, we need to be more JLA. And then, as I said, so this is just saying, hey, we need JLA is hot. Can you do a JLA? And that's basically how it happened. And then it became bigger than, it's been couple absolute editions, animated movie, which I guess everyone has seen. And that's more JLA than animated because it's more Superman, Batman. It still has Martian Manhunter, Flash, Green Lantern, still those things, but it doesn't have as much of the challengers and those sort of characters. So I think one of my favorites of his, and I've been going on very long, but thank you guys. But Parker, him translating, was it the Richard Sark, those stories, those 4 graphic novels? Because I didn't know that was coming from anywhere. It's just like, and it's sort of him doing what Frank Miller does, with translating those hard-boiled stories, but doing it where it keeps the pulp, like the pulp sort of hero, but then also making it timeless. So it could be in the past, it could be in the future. He even did that for the question in the Solo. Like he did a little question 4-page thing. It's like he's updated the question, but he still kept him a pulp hero. So like that sort of ability, where it's different with Frank Miller is sort of, and this is not a denigrator, but Frank has sort of Kirby aspect and high, the lighting and all that stuff. But he, the drama that Miller has, and trying to add filmic stuff, where he plays to the pulp of the classic pulp aspects of like Hunter, of Parker, and these type of characters. Even Rocketeer, the little bit he's done with that, you can see some bits of that. So I'm very sad to hear that he passed, and it was just great. You pick up, he's done the Harley Quinn, Jonah Hex, like all these things, which is not as a comic creator, you either do the X-Men, Batman, or Superman, and you could just find him doing basically anything, any book, anything that you enjoy. Wolverine Dupe, which I'm not a fan of Dupe, but like doing the Wolverine Dupe 2-issue series, like he's just all over the place. So.
I mean, I remember I was listening to a YouTube video where he was being interviewed, and he was basically saying that one of the things he thought about comics was that they became too narrow, and they became too hardcore, and it's basically for a select comic book fan. And he was talking about the Jimmy Olsen comics, which I think was back in the 70s.
Jimmy Olsen?
Where
I'll
never forgive him. He bought my Jimmy Olsen's, but I'll never forgive him. He kind of took them from me.
I know.
He paid a good money because they were beat up. They weren't beat up, but
to the public.
Still. I said you bought them.
So the Jimmy Olsen
bought them and
comics,
stole them at the same time. Okay.
In the 1970s, they were doing over 200,000 copies of Jimmy Olsen, and they closed it. They canceled the series. But the top comic book right now is only making doing 70,000.
Yeah, but you can't really do that because if you want to compare today's comics to say Golden Age comics, they were selling millions of copies. That's like comparing radio in the 1930s to radio today.
I'm just saying what Darwyn Cooke was saying. His thing was that it became too narrow. It became too focused on the superheroes instead of being a broader spectrum of different things.
He's right.
He thought that was one of the reasons why comics were not doing as well as they possibly could be.
If you have a broad audience, your sales are definitely going to do better. But to compare what sales are now to what sales are before, that's always a very slippery slope for me, because the average comic would outsell any of the average comics today simply because you didn't have, there is such things, competition, prices, paper prices were going to go up simply because we have this capitalist system, and everything's going to go up because everybody wants raises, everybody wants more money. So I think it's a slippery slope when you start comparing sales.
I totally disagree with that. I think paper prices can be, they go up.
When comic books were still selling, and this is like Copper Age, 80s, when they made the switch from whatever paper they were to Mando paper.
Right.
And that was supposed to be a really big deal. And they started increasing the price simply for that. But the sales were still strong at that point, but the prices were still going up. Now, that's a slippery slope where you go, well, okay, we're going to raise it because we want better quality paper. But the bottom line is those books were selling with the quality of paper they had. Nobody was buying them and saying, well, you know what? If the paper quality was better, I'd be buying. No, people were buying them and they were enjoying them.
But the companies were making more money. You know what I'm saying?
Well, there are more readers too.
Yeah,
the fact that those numbers in the past, whether it be the 40s to the 60s, those are actual readers reading the book. Whereas now, when the Black Panther sells, how much was it, like 300 or?
Yeah, it did 300. But how many people bought? I mean, they had 6 different covers.
Yeah, there you go. That's the thing.
6 different covers, which wasn't something that you had before. But I mean, my introduction to Cooke was a Catwoman story. It was a Catwoman graphic novel, and it was just a classic caper. Really enjoyable, and to be honest, I didn't even know he did it. Okay, I didn't realize he did it until I was reading another story, and this was Superman Confidential, and this was supposed to be one of these out of continuity, almost anthology type series, and it's supposed to be Superman's first introduction to Kryptonite. And I read through that, and that's when I actually realized, okay, the guy who wrote this is, someone wrote this, and I really enjoyed both of the stories. I never really got into any of his Marvel work, and it was, the thing that, of course, really puts me in tune with him is the New Frontier. Why? Because I think it's incredibly difficult to tell a good Justice League of America story. You have all of these major characters on there, and to be quite honest, any one of them, for the most part, maybe with the exception of Green Arrow or Aquaman for that portion, should be able to solve this problem. It's pretty much easy, because you see, even in the film they did, the animated film, you see that same sort of Justice League out, that same sort of trapdoor they use. Okay, how are we going to tell this story? Well, we'll kind of just put Superman off to the side, get rid of him. Wonder Woman, we're just going to keep her fighting. Batman, we're going to put him in a ship, and then the main source of the problem is going to be solved by one of the lower tier characters, like Flash or Green Lantern.
You can't say they're lower tier characters.
Sorry,
they were the beginning of the Silver
But they are
Age.
second tier characters.
They're second tier.
To the big.
They were the ones that brought back comics.
Grant Morrison and the satellite era during the Bronze Age and Grant Morrison's run are two of probably the best examples of using the entire team without having somebody to be sidelined, because they would do this all of the time, and readers didn't like it. I think in the Silver Age, I think this is like Justice League of America number 5, where they're fighting something and they're losing, they're having a terrible time of it, and literally Superman shows up, takes whatever they're fighting, breaks it over his knee, smiles at them, and flies off. And everybody was like, "Hey, what was that? What was that?" So it's really difficult to tell a good Justice League of America story, which I thought he accomplished with the New Frontier. But also,
why?
I like the. You want me to finish?
I was like, why? You said, and then just.
But also, okay, he took the Silver Age is looked at as this silly, quirky time period because of the stories. And no one seems to reflect that the Silver Age, what was going on in real life, in comparison, was very serious, and that actually dictated a lot of what was going on in the stories as well. So you have McCarthyism, you have the Red Scare, all of these things going. So if we had comics that reflected that, you can only imagine what it would have been. And what he did with the New Frontier was a good reflection of, look, this is what the time period was, and injecting those characters into the time period. Not that it hadn't been done before, because they did that with the Justice Society story, The Golden Age, which explains how they stopped. But he did a really good job of expanding the story past just, okay, we have this large alien threat that's going to destroy the world. No, the larger story was all of the complexity that was going on, Vietnam War. And of course, hindsight being 2020, what our reflection is on right there. He brings in John Henry Irons as a counter to the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. He has Superman. I didn't like it, but again, it's Superman. Deciding where do I actually take leadership here. Wonder Woman, and again, it's still borrowing from some of the other stuff. You can see the influence. With Superman, the influence is definitely Dark Knight Returns, and with Wonder Woman, the influence is definitely Kingdom Come, where she's there and she's deciding, well, I'm going to go and strong-arm this, and then, of course, repatriating herself back to Paradise Island. But it was a story that encompassed all of the characters, even the ones who didn't get a lot of light. I mean, the only person who really didn't get light was Aquaman for the most part. He kind of just shows up at the end and says, "Hey, here's Superman," and
it also has some things are condensed. So there was some characters that didn't get in. I would definitely like to see more, but he had a couple of big splashes of not just that, but earlier hinting that when Aquaman's doing something fighting underwater. Obviously, it would be fun to see a lot more of them. But I can't disagree. But but at the same time, he did highlight them.
And that's one of the problems when you have the Justice League is that how do you get everybody in here? Yeah. Okay, and some guys get written off to the side, but I don't think it really undercut the story. As a Superman fan, there's certain things I'm going to look for, but overall, it's probably one of the best Justice League stories. And I mean, aside of the Bronze Age, it's really hard to find those right now because they're more being put together because, look, this is a great selling point having all the characters together. Whereas Darwyn Cooke's New Frontier sold the characters through an excellent story. And, you know, everybody had their part, everybody played their role, but it was just an excellent form of storytelling at the end of the day. And that really attracted me to it. I thought the follow-up to it was a bit weaker. You know,
Which one?
That was like that was the
extra?
New Frontier. That was like the New Frontier special.
Okay. When they had to fight.
Yeah, that type of stuff. I thought he just said, hey, well, I get a chance to do my Superman Batman fight, even though this makes absolutely no sense. And you know, he kind of indulged himself on it. I mean, come on, he hit him with a kryptonite harpoon. I was just like, okay. It's sort of like, you know, it reminds me of what goes on with The Dark Knight and even after Kingdom Come, where they do these sequels and they never wrote them to be they never wrote the originals, the first story to have a sequel.
Standalone, and then
so now when you do that, it kind of, you know, okay, let's try to show what happened before Watchmen.
Oh, come on, that's it.
And then we have these problems that come later because it loses all of the complexity and all of the gravitas of the original story. But that got me just a lot of respect, not necessarily for the art, but the storytelling.
Yeah.
I have the utmost respect for someone who has a vision and is able to execute it. I don't give credit for, well, he tried to do something different. There are a whole bunch of people trying to do something different, but to execute it and get it done, and get it done well, and get it done right. And it's still there.
Yeah.
You know, for everybody to see and to inspire later generations. But the biggest thing that I gave for Cooke is that he was on record with a lot of the stuff that I've said, so of course I'm going to agree with him, saying that, look, these stories need, he's correct. You contracted your audience when you decided, hey, we're going to go the Watchmen route and we're going to go darker, more adult. He said, no, these, you know, need to be reflective of the people who can read them, and you're not bringing any kids into this. And I don't know, I thought it was a little contradictory because I don't think the New Frontier is really a very kid-friendly story overall. I mean, the designs, people may say those are kiddish.
The brightness, the color.
Okay,
but John Henry Irons part.
I thought I was watching the animated with my son. You know, I was watching it with my son before the show. You know, as a reminder. And he got into the animation. He's looking at it and so on. But a lot of the stuff that he was doing in the New Frontier, to be quite honest, you would have to be a bit older. You would have to have a knowledge of history.
Yeah.
You would wonder, why is it that Wonder Woman let these women kill these guys? You would wonder, well, why is Superman just walking away from all of this? Why is he working for the government? You know, a lot of the other things. The best story there is the Bill Dunn's Roman of Hal Jordan, you know, where you get to see the full fruition of him becoming Green Lantern. And that ties into the Justice League of America actually being founded, saying, no, the Justice League of America is going to be separate from the government. It's not going to make the mistakes of you know, working for the government, any of the previous things that we had. Those are really good selling points. That sort of complexity, though, I'm not certain if a kid would be able to get into it. But, you know, definitely the art and everything of that nature. But what Cooke said, and I really agreed with it, is that you need to have these stories that a kid can get into. But at the same time, an adult can get into as well. I don't think comic books are for necessarily older people, but for people who are older but still young at heart. Because a lot of this stuff you have to be willing to surrender. You have to surrender a lot of the things that we gain with maturity and be willing to invest yourself into a world where anything is possible, anything can happen, where you're going to have the debate over who can beat who in a fight, who's faster, but at the same time still be awed and amazed when these things all come together. That part of you is still alive, is still bright and still vibrant, and to sell to those people. But the biggest audience you have are kids, and they're just ignored to such a large extent. And he was very vocal on record that the comic books should be accessible. It doesn't have to be for kids. And a lot of times when people say that, they're thinking, oh, you're thinking Richie Rich or, you know, the Smurfs. And it's like, no, they just need to be accessible for kids. You can have complex stories. Most of us were reading Daredevil at the time. That's not a lightweight story at the time, but it's still accessible for a kid in terms of the action, the adventure, okay?
But he was also talking more than just a story. Also the mediums, other than just being paper, being electronic. You know, digital, you know, sending those things out.
If you're going to make the mediums digital, okay, and to be honest, I didn't read too much when he said for that. If you're going to make the mediums digital, then you have to go all the way with it. I mean, I read comics on my iPad, and all it is I'm just flipping to the side. You can do so much more with them. You can do the audio.
And that's what he's saying.
You can do soundtrack. Okay, you could do, I mean, literally, you can do stuff in terms of pop-up, but that costs money. And they're not willing to invest that sort of money into it.
But then that's what he was saying. He's saying the industry is just too stuck on a particular format. the comic itself, and the animated, of course.
Sell it to kids.
But
Sell it to kids.
Right, but he's saying doing digital, where you can reach, where you have tons of kids who have these electronic devices, that if you somehow get something to them, they can respond to
the kids would read the paper copies before they would read the digital
But
ones.
the question is, what is comics? Is comics only just the physical form, or is it also just the story, the format of what we're talking about, the animation? And
The physical form is important. I think the I think the print, is always going to be more important than the digital, because holding it in your hand, your own mind controlling the zoom, the complexity of what the artwork looks like to you, as opposed to, once it's digital, a lot of that stuff is done for you, but holding it in your hand, just the tactile connection that you make with it, it can't compare to the digital.
But the problem is that you're missing an entire audience. You know what I'm trying to say? The audience
But you're not even going for that audience.
No, but I'm saying
digital,
to make the story,
shorter,
the
though.
story.
You have to go, what works in digital and what works as an animation would be a lot shorter and a lot quicker, because that's what they're picking up.
Right.
So you're saying, like, that's why the DC animated, they're the only ones that really doing animation. Marvel has sort of stopped, and they just do Batman and JLA stuff, and some Superman stuff. But that's their core thing, and it's like, how would you connect? If you're saying you're trying to connect, then maybe you would do shorter bits, but then it wouldn't be a comic. It'd be something completely different. It'd be almost a comic strip.
Almost probably maybe
shorter.
like a serial, right?
Yeah.
Probably maybe something, but instead of coming out once a month, it comes out every week.
And Cook was on record that he hated the New 52, which I wish more guys had come out. Jerry Conway came out and wasn't as eloquent about it.
Yes.
But thank you, Jerry Conway. But he was on record that he didn't like the New 52. You have a plethora of history, and you wiped it out for what reason? For no reason whatsoever. Then you needed some cash. Now look at these guys. They're so stuck that they're going back and coming up with probably one of the most ill-contrived reasons for the New 52, which I won't spoil. Maybe. Stay tuned. That I won't spoil, at least right now. But I like the fact that he was on record about, look, this is what comics are. This is what comic books mean. That this was somebody, I never got the chance to meet him or interview him, but this is someone who I genuinely believe loved comic books, wanted to work in the medium, and wanted other people to love them as well. It wasn't a bottom line. It wasn't about the dollar. It was like, no, keep this alive and vibrant for future generations so they can have the same fun and the same experience that we were able to have. Let them be able to read it and make a decision for themselves, as opposed to, this is just so far, out of their scope and frame of reference that they're never even going to look at it in the first place. So if people are wondering, why don't they sell as much? You contracted your audience to 30, 40-year-old guys, 50-year-old guys, and you're making your money not based on the quality of your story. You're making your money based on the fact that you're printing out 7 copies of the first issue. To the point where a guy like me is going to buy a comic and they're telling you can only buy one. Why? Why can I only buy one? Because someone else is going to buy 10 simply so they can market and sell it up. The kids aren't doing that. The reasons why comic books back in the older days were dog-eared and frayed and more valuable.
They were more cheap. They were cheaper.
Well, what is cheap? If you look at the old, they able to keep the price down. But when the comics first came out, you have, what was it? These have like comics 10 cents. A haircut is 10 cents.
65 cents.
Everything else is the same thing.
Come on,
I'm saying when it first came out, like if you look at the pricing, like when it's 10 cents, but they kept the price down. It's like keep the paper cheaper, keep the price down, because it was saying this is for kids. Let's not, because obviously the magazines went up in price, but the comics didn't. So the comics are like, we had to keep it. What was it? People always, when a new comic was coming out, it's like, such and such is back on this book, and the kid, person coming like $2 for a comic book. Like if you get to that point, like people were complaining, like that's the problem. There's no way to get it down.
It's a lot of money to pay for something. You have to look back at the Silver Age, where the Silver Age, or even the Golden Age books, where you had a condensed format. In a Silver Age book, you got 3 stories. And those, if you tried to read one today, you'd probably have a headache, because it was so condensed. No, because most readers now are used to that 5-panel splash page. There's not a lot of reading involved. You have to read a Silver Age book. You have to. There's dialogue. There's 8-9 panels per page. 3 stories in a book. Most of these writers couldn't imagine doing anything of that nature right now.
So throwing away, saying I'm bringing this monster in. I could do like a 6-issue. I could do a 12-issue story on this thing that they would pay. It's Spider-Man. You have the first Spider-Man story is 15 pages.
Yeah.
Bendis' book is 6.
They decompressed it to 6 issues, 8
issue
issues.
in Ultimate Spider-Man.
Just with splash pages. And that used to be just the first page of the book to get some interest, and that was it. Everything else was supposed to be more panels. So, I wish there were more people like Cook who were more vocal about it and could be more vocal about it. He was an establishing a voice in the comic book industry where he could say these sorts of things and not worry about, I'm going to get work. Even to the point he was turning down work. Grant Morrison had approached him to do a book for the Multiversity, and he turned it down simply because he had got to the point he didn't want to be known as the Golden Age artist anymore. If you had a story and you wanted him to do it, fine, but he wasn't going to do it strictly because he was well known for doing that Golden Age, that Silver Age style. And, lastly, at least for me, we're not getting, like I said earlier, we said this off camera, but we're not getting more Darwyn Cookes. We're not getting more Alex Rosses. We're not getting more Stan Lee, for that. We're getting, I don't know what we're getting, but we're not getting that. We're not getting a lot of people who've read comics, who have come into comics and love them or trying to promote them. That's all they want to do. And every time we lose someone like a Darwyn Cooke, it's not like a little hole, at least for me. It's a big, gaping wound for me.